The rental car's engine hummed quietly as David Chen pulled into the gravel parking lot of the Sunrise Diner. The small building sat alone on a stretch of Montana highway, its neon sign flickering against the darkening sky. He'd been driving for 6 hours straight, and his body ached from sitting too long. But it wasn't the physical pain that bothered him. The emptiness inside his chest had become so familiar that he barely noticed it anymore. David turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the diner's warm yellow windows. He could see a few customers inside, ordinary people having ordinary meals. Nobody who would recognize him. Nobody who knew that David Chen had built a technology empire worth $12 billion. Nobody who knew that 6 months ago his wife had died, and he'd been driving aimlessly across America ever since, trying to outrun the grief that followed him everywhere. The September air felt cool when he stepped out of the car. David stretched his back and looked around. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks catching the last rays of sunlight. This was the kind of place his wife Rebecca would have loved. She always preferred small towns over cities, real conversations over business meetings. He felt the familiar sting behind his eyes and pushed the thought away. A bell chimed when he opened the diner's door. The smell of coffee and fresh pie hit him immediately. The place was simple and clean, with red vinyl booths and a long counter with spinning stools. An older couple sat by the window. A truck driver hunched over his plate at the counter. Country music played softly from a radio somewhere in the kitchen. David chose a booth in the corner, away from the other customers. He wanted to be alone, but not completely isolated. That had become his preference lately. Close enough to hear life happening around him, far enough that he didn't have to participate. He'd barely settled into his seat when a woman approached with a coffee pot and a menu. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes, but her smile seemed genuine. She appeared to be in her late 20s, with her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her name tag read, Jenny. "Evening," she said, her voice warm despite the obvious exhaustion. "Coffee? Please." David turned over the mug that sat waiting on the table. She poured carefully, not spilling a drop. "You just passing through, or are you staying in town?" "Just passing through." David accepted the menu but didn't open it. "What's good here?" "Everything's fresh," Jenny said. "But if you want my honest opinion, the apple pie is incredible. My daughter says it tastes like happiness." She laughed softly at her own words. "Sorry, that probably sounds silly." "No," David said, surprised to find himself almost smiling. "It sounds nice. I'll have the pie then, and keep the coffee coming." "You got it." Jenny wrote on her small notepad, though he'd only ordered one thing. Before she walked away, she paused. "The sunset's going to be beautiful in about 10 minutes. Best view is right from that window next to you." David glanced at the window, then back at her. "Thanks for the tip." She nodded and headed toward the kitchen, stopping to refill the truck driver's coffee on her way. David watched her move through the diner with efficient grace. There was something about her that caught his attention. Maybe it was the kindness in her eyes, or the way she seemed to genuinely care about the sunset, even though she'd probably seen thousands of them from this same diner. The pie arrived a few minutes later, warm with vanilla ice cream melting on top. Jenny set it down with a fresh napkin and fork. "There you go, enjoy." David took a bite and was surprised by how good it actually tasted. Sweet and tart at the same time, with a perfectly flaky crust. He found himself eating slowly, savoring it. When was the last time he'd actually tasted his food? For months, eating had been just another thing his body required, like breathing or sleeping. True to Jenny's prediction, the sunset began painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. David turned to watch it, his coffee cup warming his hands. The mountains stood dark against the colorful sky. Rebecca would have taken a picture. She would have called him over to look, her voice full of wonder, even though they'd seen countless sunsets together. She never lost her amazement at beautiful things. "Told you it'd be worth watching," Jenny said, appearing beside his table to refill his coffee. She took a moment to look out the window herself. "I never get tired of this view. Every sunset's different. How long have you worked here?" David asked, surprising himself. He hadn't meant to start a conversation. 3 years. Jenny tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's good work. The owner's kind, the customers are mostly decent, and I can usually get my daughter to daycare and back without too much trouble." "You have a daughter?" Jenny's whole face brightened. "Sophia, she's 6. Smartest kid I've ever met, but I'm probably biased." She laughed. She wants to be an astronaut or maybe a veterinarian. Changes every week. Sounds like a great kid, David said. She is. Jenny's smile faltered just slightly, so briefly that most people wouldn't have noticed. But David had spent decades reading people in business meetings, catching the tiny expressions that revealed what someone was really thinking. Something was wrong, something Jenny wasn't saying, but she recovered quickly, her smile back in place. Anyway, I'll let you enjoy your pie in peace. Just wave if you need anything. David returned to his dessert but found himself watching Jenny as she moved around the diner. She chatted easily with the older couple, remembered the truck driver's preference for extra cream in his coffee, and cleaned tables with thorough efficiency. But David noticed other things too. The way she rubbed her lower back when she thought no one was looking. The exhaustion that showed when her smile dropped between customers. The worn quality of her shoes, the kind of worn that came from long hours standing. He recognized that kind of tired. Not the temporary exhaustion from a hard day, but the deep weariness that came from carrying too much for too long. He'd seen it in his own mirror after Rebecca got sick, when he was trying to run his company and be at the hospital and pretend that everything would be okay when they both knew it wouldn't be. The diner gradually emptied as evening turned to night. The older couple left, followed by the truck driver. New customers came and went. David ordered another piece of pie, more to justify staying than because he was hungry. He pulled out a book he'd been carrying for weeks but couldn't seem to focus on. The words blurred together on the page. Around 8 o'clock, Jenny approached his table again. "Can I get you anything else?" "More coffee?" "I'm probably good," David said. "Don't want to be awake all night." He paused, then added, "You've been on your feet for hours. When does your shift end?" Jenny glanced at the clock on the wall. Supposed to be 9, but Teresa called in sick, so I'm covering until closing, midnight. That's a long day. "It's not so bad," Jenny said, but David could hear the exhaustion underneath her cheerful tone. "The extra hours help, and it's better than sitting at home worrying." There it was again, that hint of something beneath the surface. David wanted to ask what she was worried about, but he was a stranger and she was being professional. It wasn't his place to pry. "Well, I hope the rest of your shift goes quickly," he said instead. "Thanks." Jenny smiled at him, and this time it reached her eyes. "You know, you're the easiest customer I've had all day. Some people—" She shook her head. "Never mind. I shouldn't complain. Everyone needs to vent sometimes," David said. Jenny studied him for a moment, her head tilted slightly. "You seem like you're carrying something heavy too. I don't mean to be nosy, but I noticed you've been sitting here for a couple hours now and you look, I don't know, sad maybe, or lost." David felt something catch in his throat. When was the last time someone had actually seen him, really looked at him and noticed what he was feeling? His business associates treated him with careful respect. His friends had stopped calling after the funeral, not knowing what to say. Even his own family tiptoed around him, afraid to mention Rebecca's name. "I lost someone," he heard himself say. 6 months ago. "My wife." Jenny's expression softened immediately. "I'm so sorry." "That kind of loss." She sat down across from him. Uninvited, but somehow perfectly appropriate. "It changes everything, doesn't it? You sound like you know. My husband died 3 years ago. Construction accident." Jenny twisted the wedding ring she still wore. "So yeah, I know. I know how the world keeps spinning when yours has stopped. I know how people say it gets easier with time, and you want to scream because it doesn't feel easier at all." David stared at her. This stranger, this waitress in a small-town diner, had just put into words exactly what he'd been feeling for months. "Everyone keeps telling me to move on, to focus on my work, to stay busy, to start living again, but they don't understand that I don't want to move on. Moving on feels like leaving her behind." Jenny nodded slowly. "I felt that way too. Like if I stopped being sad, it meant I was forgetting him. Like my grief was the last connection I had." She looked out the window at the dark sky. But then Sophia started having these nightmares. She was so scared. And I realized she needed a mom who could function, who could help her through her own grief while dealing with mine. So I had to figure out how to keep living. Not because I wanted to, but because she needed me to. That must have been hard. "Hardest thing I've ever done," Jenny admitted. "Still is most days. But I learned something. Moving forward isn't the same as forgetting. You can carry someone with you while still putting one foot in front of the other." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. David felt something loosen slightly in his chest. like a knot that had been pulled tight for months was finally getting some slack. Jenny glanced toward the kitchen, then back at David. I should get back to work, but thank you for listening and for sharing. Sometimes it helps just to know someone else understands. Thank you, David said. Really, what you said, it helped. Jenny stood up, smoothing her apron. You take care of yourself, okay? Whatever you're going through, you'll find your way. It won't look like you expected, but you'll get there. She walked back toward the counter, and David sat with his cold coffee, turning her words over in his mind. He watched her work, noticed the strength beneath the exhaustion, the determination in the way she kept moving even though she was clearly running on empty. An hour later, David finally paid his bill, leaving a generous cash tip. He stood up, pulled on his jacket, and headed for the door. His hand was on the handle when he remembered something. His reading glasses. He'd taken them off earlier and left them on the table. David turned back, walking to the booth where he'd been sitting. Jenny was already there, clearing his dishes. She hadn't noticed him return. She was holding something small in her hand, looking at it with an expression he couldn't quite read. It was the napkin that had been under his coffee cup, and there was writing on it. I'm sorry, David said, making her jump slightly. I forgot my glasses. Jenny's face flushed red. She quickly moved to crumple the napkin, but David had already seen that she'd written something on it. His curiosity was too strong. What does it say? He asked gently. Nothing. It's nothing. I shouldn't have. Jenny looked embarrassed, younger suddenly, like a child caught doing something she wasn't supposed to. Please, David said. I'd like to know. Jenny hesitated, then slowly held out the napkin. Her hand trembled slightly. I could tell you were hurting. I wanted to, I don't know, say something that might help. But it was inappropriate. You're a customer, and I should have just minded my own business. David took the napkin and read the neat handwriting. Whatever storm you're facing, remember, the sun is still shining above the clouds. You're going to be okay. Oh, Jay. He read it twice, then looked up at Jenny. Her eyes were anxious, waiting for his reaction. David felt something crack open inside him, something that had been frozen solid since Rebecca died. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was something. Hope, maybe, or the memory of what hope felt like. This is the kindest thing anyone's done for me in months, David said quietly. Thank you, Jenny. Her shoulders relaxed. You really mean that? I really do. David carefully folded the napkin and put it in his pocket. When does your shift actually end? You said midnight? Yeah, but you don't have to. Can I buy you a coffee afterward? Just to talk? Jenny looked at him carefully, and David could see her weighing the decision. A stranger asking to meet after midnight could be dangerous. But whatever she saw in his face must have reassured her because she nodded slowly. Okay. There's an all-night diner about 2 miles up the road. I'll meet you there at 12:15. I'll be there, David promised. He found his glasses on the seat and left the diner, but this time when he walked out into the dark parking lot, something had shifted. The emptiness was still there. The grief still sat heavy on his shoulders, but underneath it all, for the first time in 6 months, David felt something else. He felt like maybe, just maybe, Jenny was right. Maybe the sun was still shining somewhere above the clouds. The all-night diner was called the Silver Moon, and it looked exactly like every other roadside diner David had seen on his cross-country journey. Chrome fixtures, checkered floor, and the smell of bacon that never quite went away. He'd arrived early, at midnight exactly, and chosen a booth by the window where he could watch for Jenny's car. His hand kept going to his jacket pocket, touching the folded napkin. He'd read her message at least 20 times in the 2 hours since leaving the Sunrise Diner. Each time, the words hit him differently. Whatever storm you're facing, remember, the sun is still shining above the clouds. It was simple, maybe even a little cheesy if he was being honest. But it was real. Someone had seen his pain and wanted to help. Expected nothing in return, just offered kindness to a stranger. Headlights swept across the parking lot at 12:10. An older sedan, probably 15 years old with a dent in the front fender, pulled into a spot near the door. Jenny climbed out, and David noticed she moved stiffly like every muscle ached. She'd changed out of her work uniform into jeans and a sweater, but she still looked exhausted. David raised his hand when she entered, and her face relaxed when she spotted him. She slid into the booth across from him with a small sigh of relief. I wasn't sure you'd actually be here, Jenny admitted. Thought maybe you'd change your mind. I almost thought you might not come, David said. Meeting a stranger at midnight isn't exactly the safest decision. Jenny smiled slightly. I called my sister and told her where I was going and your license plate number. She thinks I'm crazy, but she's on standby with pepper spray and a baseball bat just in case. She was joking, but David could tell there was truth underneath it. That's actually really smart, he said. I'm glad you're careful. A waitress appeared, looking as tired as Jenny had been earlier. They both ordered coffee and Jenny added a slice of chocolate cake. I know I shouldn't, but I've been craving sugar all day and after a 16-hour shift I think I've earned it. 16 hours? David was shocked. You started at 8 this morning? 6:30 actually. Morning shift until 2, then came back at 4 for the evening shift. Jenny rubbed her eyes. It's not usually this bad, but we're short-staffed. And I need the extra money right now. David wanted to ask why, wanted to know what was driving this woman to work herself into the ground, but he forced himself to wait. Let her share if she wanted to. Don't push. Their coffee arrived, and Jenny wrapped both hands around her mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth. For a moment, they both just sat there, two tired people in a mostly empty diner in the middle of nowhere. I really am sorry about the napkin thing, Jenny said finally. It was presumptuous of me. I don't usually do things like that. What made you do it today? Jenny considered the question, stirring cream into her coffee slowly. You reminded me of myself about 2 years ago. That look in your eyes like you're going through the motions but not really living, like you're waiting for something to make sense again but you don't believe it ever will. She looked up at him. I'm not saying I know what you're going through. Everyone's grief is different, but I recognize something in you. Your husband, David said quietly. You mentioned he died in a construction accident. Jenny nodded, her fingers playing with her wedding ring. 3 years ago next month. Luis was a good man. The best, actually. We were high school sweethearts, got married young, had Sophia right away. He worked construction and I was going to nursing school. She paused, her voice catching slightly. Then one day I got a call from the hospital. There'd been an accident at the site. A beam fell. He died before I could get there. I'm so sorry, David said and meant it. The worst part wasn't even his death, Jenny continued, surprising him. I mean, that was horrible, devastating. But I knew eventually I'd have to figure out how to live without him. The worst part was Sophia. She was 3 years old and she didn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming home. How do you explain death to a 3-year-old? David thought about that. He and Rebecca had never had children. They'd planned to someday when the business was more stable, when they had more time. Someday had never come. I can't imagine how hard that must have been. It was impossible, Jenny said simply. But you do it anyway because you have to. Because this tiny person needs you to be okay even when you're falling apart. She took a sip of her coffee. I had to drop out of nursing school. Couldn't afford it without Luis's income and I needed to work full-time. My dreams went on hold. Actually, they went into storage, boxed up with all the other things I thought my life would be. The chocolate cake arrived, and Jenny pushed it to the center of the table. Share it with me? I ordered it, but I'm not sure I can finish the whole thing. David picked up a fork and took a bite. It was good, rich and sweet. They ate in comfortable silence for a moment before Jenny spoke again. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Your wife. What was her name? No one had asked him that in months. Everyone tiptoed around Rebecca's name like saying it would shatter him. But hearing Jenny ask so directly and gently felt like a gift. Rebecca, David said, and was surprised that his voice stayed steady. She was a teacher. 3rd grade. She loved it. Said kids that age still believed they could be anything, do anything. She wanted to be part of protecting that belief. She sounds wonderful. She was. David found himself smiling, remembering. She was also stubborn as hell, competitive about the strangest things and completely hopeless at cooking. She once burned water. I'm still not sure how that's physically possible. Jenny laughed, a real laugh that lit up her tired face. Okay, I need to hear that story. David told her about the time Rebecca had tried to make pasta and somehow left an empty pot on the stove until all the water evaporated and the pot started smoking. They'd had to air out the entire apartment. Rebecca had been so embarrassed, but then she'd started laughing. And they'd ended up ordering pizza and eating it on the fire escape, watching the city lights. She sounds like she was full of life, Jenny said softly. She was, right up until the end. David's smile faded. Cancer. It started as stage 2 breast cancer. We caught it early, did everything right. Surgery, chemo, radiation. She was in remission for 8 months. We thought we'd beaten it. He stopped, took a breath. Then it came back. Stage 4. In her bones, her liver, her lungs. After that, it was just a matter of time. Jenny reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. No words, just that small gesture of understanding. The last few months were hard, David continued. She was in so much pain and I was helpless. I had all the money in the world, could afford the best doctors, the best hospitals, experimental treatments. None of it mattered. Money couldn't save her. Money can't fix everything, Jenny agreed. But the fact that you were there with her, that she didn't face it alone, that matters more than any treatment. David looked at her curiously. How are you so wise about grief? Most people say all the wrong things, Jenny shrugged. I've had 3 years of practice, and I've heard every terrible platitude that exists. He's in a better place. Everything happens for a reason. God needed another angel. People mean well, but those words don't help when you're drowning. Exactly. David felt the relief of being understood. Everyone kept telling me time heals all wounds. But it's been 6 months and I don't feel healed. I feel lost. Time doesn't heal wounds, Jenny said quietly. It just gives you practice carrying them. The weight doesn't get lighter. You just get stronger at bearing it. They finished the cake together, talking about grief and loss and the strange ways life continued even when you wanted it to stop. David learned that Jenny's parents had passed away years ago, and Luis's family had moved back to Mexico after his death. She was essentially alone except for her sister, who lived 2 hours away. What about Sophia? David asked. You said earlier you were worried about something. Does it have to do with her? Jenny's expression changed, becoming guarded. I shouldn't burden you with that. You've got your own troubles. Sometimes it helps to share the burden, David said, echoing her earlier words back to her. Jenny studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Sophia's sick. She has a heart condition, congenital heart defect that we didn't know about until last year. She needs surgery, a complicated one, and it's expensive. How expensive? $850,000 expensive. Jenny said the number like it was a foreign language. My insurance covers some of it, but not nearly enough. I've been fundraising, doing everything I can. The community has been amazing. We've raised about $12,000 over the past 18 months. David's mind was already racing, doing calculations. 12,000 out of 850,000. It would take her decades to raise that much money. And from the sound of it, Sophia didn't have decades. How much time does she have? He asked carefully. The doctors say she's stable for now, but they want to do the surgery within the next 6 months. After that, the risks start increasing. Jenny's voice was steady, but David could see the fear in her eyes. I'm doing everything I can. Working double shifts, selling everything we don't need, applying for grants. There's a fundraiser next month. I'm hopeful. David heard the false note in that last word. She wasn't hopeful. She was terrified and trying to convince herself that hope was still possible. That's why you work so much, he said. You're trying to save your daughter's life, wouldn't you? Jenny met his eyes. Wouldn't you do anything, work any hours, sacrifice anything if it meant saving someone you loved? David thought about the last months of Rebecca's life, the experimental treatments they'd tried, the specialists they'd flown in from around the world. Yes, he said simply. I would. I did. Then you understand. Jenny glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 1 a.m. I should probably get home. My sister's watching Sophia and I don't want to keep her too late. Wait, David said. He wasn't ready for this conversation to end. He'd felt more alive in the past hour than he had in months. Can I ask you something? Why did you write that message on the napkin? The real reason. Jenny was quiet for a moment, collecting her thoughts. When Luis died, I was in a really dark place. I couldn't see any light anywhere. Then one day I was driving Sophia to daycare, and we got stuck behind this really slow truck on the highway. Sophia was in her car seat getting fussy, and I was getting frustrated. Then she pointed up at the sky and said, Mama, look at the pretty clouds. And I realized the sun was shining behind them, making them glow. She smiled at the memory. It was such a simple thing, but it reminded me that just because I couldn't see the light didn't mean it wasn't there. The sun was still shining. I just couldn't see it from where I was standing. That thought got me through some really hard days. So you wanted to pass that on to me. I know it probably sounds silly, Jenny said. You're going through real grief, real pain. A note on a napkin isn't going to fix that. But maybe on some dark day down the road you'll remember it. Remember that the sun is still there, even when you can't see it. David pulled the napkin from his pocket and carefully unfolded it on the table between them. I'm not going to throw this away. I'm going to keep it. And you're right. On dark days I'll remember. Jenny smiled, and this time it reached her eyes despite the exhaustion. Good. That makes me happy. They paid their separate checks and walked out to the parking lot together. The night air was cool and clean, with a million stars visible in the rural Montana sky. Jenny paused before getting into her car. Thank you for tonight, she said, for listening, for sharing about Rebecca, for not making me feel weird about the napkin thing. It helped me too, talking to someone who understands. Thank you for giving me someone to talk to, David replied, and for reminding me that I'm not alone in this. Jenny hesitated, then said, I know you're just passing through, but if you're still in town tomorrow, I work the morning shift at the diner. 6:30 to 2. You'd be welcome to stop by for breakfast. I might just do that, David said. He watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing down the dark highway. Then he stood there for a few more minutes, looking up at the stars. His phone buzzed in his pocket. 3 missed calls from his assistant, 2 from his brother, several emails marked urgent. The world of business and responsibilities waiting for him to come back. But David wasn't ready to go back. Not yet. He looked down at the napkin in his hand, at Jenny's neat handwriting reminding him that the sun still shone somewhere above the clouds. An idea was forming in his mind, something that scared him because it mattered, because it meant engaging with life again instead of just drifting through it. He got in his rental car and drove back to the small motel where he'd checked in earlier. But instead of going to sleep, he opened his laptop and started researching. Heart conditions in children, surgical procedures, hospitals that specialized in pediatric cardiac surgery, fundraising platforms, grant opportunities. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, David made a decision. He didn't know if it was the right decision or if it would work, but it was the first decision in 6 months that felt like it meant something. He thought about what Rebecca would say if she could see him now. She'd always believed that money should be used to help people, that their wealth was a responsibility, not just a privilege. She'd pushed him to start a foundation, to give back, to make a difference. Maybe it was time to listen to her voice again. David pulled out his phone and sent a text to his assistant, knowing she'd see it first thing in the morning. I need you to compile information on pediatric heart surgery specialists and facilities. Also, get me the details on setting up an emergency medical fund. I'll explain tomorrow. Then he set the phone aside and looked at Jenny's napkin one more time before carefully placing it in his wallet, right where he used to keep a photo of Rebecca. The sun was still shining somewhere above the clouds. And for the first time in 6 months, David thought he might be ready to start looking for it. Outside his window, the Montana night was dark and quiet. But morning was coming, and with it the possibility of something new. Something that mattered. Something that might help him find his way back to living instead of just surviving. He finally climbed into bed as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, and for the first time since Rebecca died, David Chen fell asleep with something resembling hope in his heart. David woke up at 5 in the morning after only 2 hours of sleep, but his mind was sharper than it had been in months. He showered, dressed, and spent an hour on his laptop before the sun had fully risen. His assistant had already responded to his late-night text with detailed information about pediatric cardiac specialists, including 3 hospitals with the best success rates for the type of surgery Sophia needed. The numbers were staggering. $850,000 was just the beginning. There would be follow-up care, medications, possible complications, physical therapy. Jenny was looking at over $1 million in total costs, and she was trying to do it on a waitress's salary while raising a daughter alone. David's phone rang at 6:15. His brother calling from California. You're awake early, David answered. You texted my assistant at 3 in the morning about medical research, his brother Kevin said. I've been worried about you for months, and now you're randomly asking about pediatric heart surgery. What's going on? I met someone, David said. There was a pause. Okay, that's good, right? I mean, it's only been 6 months, but if you're ready to... Not like that, David interrupted. I met someone who needs help. A waitress in Montana. Her daughter needs heart surgery and she can't afford it. And you want to pay for it. Kevin's voice was careful, neutral. I'm thinking about it. David. His brother sighed. I know you're hurting. I know you want to find meaning in what happened with Rebecca. But you can't save every person you meet. You can't fix the world's problems by throwing money at strangers. Why not? David asked. What's the point of having $12 billion if I can't help someone who actually needs it? Because you don't know this person. She could be scamming you. People hear billionaire and suddenly everyone has a sick kid who needs money. David felt anger flash through him, hot and sharp. She doesn't know who I am. She thinks I'm just some random guy passing through town, and her daughter really is sick. I can verify that. Then set up the foundation properly, Kevin said, his tone softening. Do it through the right channels. Have lawyers vet everything. Don't just hand cash to someone you met in a diner. I know what I'm doing. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to save this kid. Because you couldn't save Rebecca. And that's not healthy, David. The words hit hard because there was truth in them. David was quiet for a moment, watching the Montana sunrise through his motel window. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am trying to fix something I couldn't fix before. But does that make it wrong? If I can help this little girl, if I can take this weight off her mother's shoulders, why shouldn't I? Kevin was quiet for a long moment. Just be careful. Please. I don't want to see you get hurt again. I will. I promise. David ended the call and sat there thinking about his brother's words. Was he doing this for the right reasons? Did the reasons even matter if the outcome was good? At 6:20, David drove to the Sunrise Diner. Only 2 other cars sat in the parking lot. The morning air was crisp and cold, his breath visible in small clouds. Through the window, he could see Jenny moving behind the counter, setting up for the breakfast rush that would start in about an hour. The bell chimed when he entered. Jenny looked up and her face brightened with genuine surprise and pleasure. You came back, she said. You invited me for breakfast. I couldn't say no to that. David slid onto a stool at the counter instead of taking a booth. It felt more companionable somehow, less formal. Coffee? Jenny was already reaching for a mug. Please. Strong and black. She poured and set it in front of him. You look tired. Did you sleep at all? A little. I had some things to think about. David wrapped his hands around the warm mug. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something important. Jenny's expression became guarded. Okay. David realized she was expecting bad news, maybe that he was leaving town and wanted to say goodbye. He rushed to reassure her. Nothing bad. At least I hope it's not bad. I need to tell you something about myself, and I'm worried it might change how you see me. Now you're making me nervous, Jenny said, but she was smiling slightly. Last night when we talked, I wasn't completely honest about who I am. David took a breath. My full name is David Chen. I own a technology company called Next Gen Solutions. I'm wealthy. Very wealthy, Jenny stared at him. How wealthy are we talking? Forbes puts my net worth around $12 billion. The coffee pot in Jenny's hand tilted dangerously. She set it down carefully on the counter, her movements deliberate. You're joking. I'm not. I can show you articles, my ID, whatever you need to see. David pulled out his phone, but Jenny held up a hand. No, I believe you. It's just... She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. I wrote a motivational note on a napkin for a billionaire. Oh my God, that's so embarrassing. It's not embarrassing. It's the kindest thing anyone's done for me in months. I meant that. David leaned forward. Jenny, I'm telling you this because I want to help. With Sophia's surgery. I want to pay for it. All the color drained from Jenny's face. She actually took a step backward. What? The surgery, the hospital costs, all of it. I can take care of it. You wouldn't have to worry about the money anymore. Jenny shook her head, her hands trembling. No, I can't accept that. Why not? Because it's too much. $850,000 isn't, I don't know, buying someone lunch. It's an insane amount of money and I can't just take it from someone I met yesterday. Jenny's voice was rising, and she glanced toward the kitchen where her coworker was prepping food. She lowered her voice. I appreciate the offer really, but it's not appropriate. David had expected this reaction. He'd spent half the night thinking about how to approach it correctly. What if it's not charity? What if there's something you can do in exchange? Like what? There's nothing I have that's worth that kind of money. Your story, David said. I've been thinking about starting a foundation in my wife's name. Rebecca always wanted to help families dealing with medical crises. If you'd be willing to share your experience, to let Sophia's story be part of our awareness campaign, it would help other families. You'd be giving hope to people in the same situation. Jenny was shaking her head before he finished. You want to use my daughter's illness for publicity? No, that came out wrong. David cursed himself for handling this badly. I'm not explaining it right. Look, people connect with stories. When they hear about a real child, a real family struggling with medical costs, they're more likely to donate, to get involved, to push for better healthcare policies. Your story could help change things for hundreds, maybe thousands of other families. While you get good publicity for being the generous billionaire, Jenny said, her tone sharp now. I don't care about publicity. I'll do this anonymously if you prefer. No one has to know my name. David felt desperate now, watching her pull away. Jenny, please. Just think about it. Think about Sophia getting the surgery she needs without you having to work yourself to death. Think about being able to focus on her recovery instead of fundraising. Jenny's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back furiously. You don't understand. I've been taking care of myself and Sophia since Luis died. I've worked 3 jobs, sold everything we don't need, asked for help until I'm sick of hearing my own voice begging. The one thing I have left is my dignity. If I just take money from you, what does that make me? It makes you a mother who loves her daughter enough to accept help when it's offered, David said gently. There's no shame in that. Easy for you to say when you're the one with $12 billion. Jenny wiped her eyes roughly. I need to get back to work. The breakfast crowd will be here soon. She walked away, disappearing into the kitchen. David sat there feeling like he'd made a terrible mistake. He'd pushed too hard, too fast. He should have waited, built more trust, approached it differently. The door chimed behind him. An older man in coveralls entered, followed by a young couple. The breakfast crowd was starting. David knew he should leave, give Jenny space. But he couldn't shake the feeling that if he left now, he'd lose whatever connection they'd built. Jenny emerged from the kitchen with her professional smile back in place. She took orders, poured coffee, chatted with customers. She didn't look at David once. He ordered pancakes he didn't really want and picked at them while watching her work. Around 7:30, during a lull, Jenny finally approached his spot at the counter. I'm sorry I snapped at you. That wasn't fair. No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have ambushed you with that. It was insensitive. Jenny refilled his coffee, her hands steadier now. Can I ask you something? Why Sophia? Why us? You must have people asking you for money all the time. Honestly? Because you didn't ask. Because you saw someone hurting and tried to help without wanting anything in return. Because when you talked about Sophia last night, I saw the same look in your eyes that I saw in the mirror when Rebecca was sick. That desperate determination to save someone you love no matter what it costs you. David met her eyes. And because for the first time in 6 months I feel like I might have found something worth doing. Rebecca wanted me to use our money to help people. I stopped caring about that after she died. But meeting you, hearing about Sophia, it reminded me why the money matters. Jenny was quiet, processing his words. A timer dinged in the kitchen. I have to get that. But David, I'll think about what you said. That's all I can promise right now. That's all I'm asking. The morning rush kept Jenny busy for the next 2 hours. David nursed his coffee and read the news on his phone, occasionally watching her work. He saw the exhaustion creeping back into her movements, the way she rubbed her lower back when she thought no one was looking. She was running on fumes, pushing herself past any reasonable limit. Around 10 o'clock, a woman entered the diner with a small girl. The child had dark curly hair and large brown eyes that looked too big for her thin face. She wore a pink jacket and carried a stuffed dragon under one arm. David knew immediately it was Sophia. Jenny's whole demeanor changed when she saw them. Her face lit up with pure joy. She hurried over, bending down to hug the little girl tightly. Baby, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be with Aunt Maria. I wanted to see you, Mama, Sophia said. Her voice was soft, slightly breathless. Aunt Maria said we could bring you lunch. The woman with Sophia, who must be Maria, gave Jenny an apologetic smile. She was missing you, and I thought you could use a real meal. Jenny's sister looked a lot like her, but with shorter hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She carried a paper bag that probably contained food from home. David watched as Jenny introduced Sophia to a couple of regulars, watched the little girl's shy smile and polite manner. She looked fragile, smaller than other 6-year-olds he'd seen. There was a slight blue tint to her lips that he recognized from his research as a sign of oxygen deprivation. This child needed surgery soon. Sophia spotted David watching and waved at him with innocent friendliness. He waved back, his heart clenching. She had no idea how sick she was, how precarious her situation. She just knew she wanted to see her mama. Jenny glanced over at David and their eyes met. He saw the fear there, the love, the desperation she tried to hide from her daughter. In that moment, something passed between them. An understanding. Jenny said something to her sister, then walked over to David's spot at the counter. She sat down on the stool next to him, a rare break in her constant motion. "That's Sophia," she said quietly. "She's beautiful. She has your smile. She has Luisa's eyes." Jenny watched her daughter coloring on a placemat at a nearby table. "She's been so tired lately. Some days she can't even make it through a full day of kindergarten. The doctors say her heart is working too hard to pump blood. Every day we wait, it gets weaker." "Jenya, I'll do it," she interrupted. "Your offer? I'll accept it, but I have conditions." David's pulse quickened. "Name them." "First, I want to repay you. I don't know how long it'll take, but I'll pay back every cent eventually, even if it takes the rest of my life." "Why, Jenny, that's my condition, non-negotiable." Her voice was firm. "Second, Sophia doesn't know how sick she is. She thinks her heart is just a little tired and needs a tune-up like a car. I want to keep it that way. She doesn't need to carry that fear." "Of course." "Third, if we do this story thing for your foundation, you keep our last name private. I don't want Sophia growing up with people knowing all her medical details. She deserves privacy." "Absolutely. We can keep it completely anonymous if you want." Jenny took a shaky breath. "And last, you have to promise me something. This isn't about making yourself feel better about losing Rebecca. This is about Sophia getting the care she needs. If you're going to do this, you have to do it for the right reasons." David thought about his brother's words that morning, about whether his motivations mattered if the outcome was good. He looked at Sophia. This little girl who just wanted to see her mama and had no idea that her life hung in the balance. "I promise," David said. "This is about Sophia. About giving her the chance to grow up, to become that astronaut or veterinarian she dreams about. Everything else is secondary." Jenny's eyes filled with tears again, but this time she let them fall. "Okay, then yes. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you enough." "You already did," David said, pulling the folded napkin from his wallet. "You reminded me that the sun still shines above the clouds. Now let me help you and Sophia see it too." Jenny laughed and cried at the same time. She squeezed his hand briefly, then stood up. "I need to tell Maria, and I need to call Sophia's doctor. Oh God, there's so much to do. I'll handle the logistics. I have people who can coordinate with the hospital, arrange everything. You just focus on Sophia." Jenny nodded, then paused. "David, why didn't you tell me last night who you were?" "Because I wanted you to see me as just a person, not a bank account. I wanted our conversation to be real." "It was real," Jenny said softly. "It's still real. The money doesn't change that." She walked back to her daughter, bent down and whispered something in Sophia's ear. The little girl's face broke into a huge smile. She jumped up and down, as much as her weak heart would allow, clearly excited about something. Maria caught David's eye from across the diner. She mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." David nodded, feeling something warm spreading through his chest. It wasn't happiness exactly, not yet, but it was close. It was purpose. It was the feeling of doing something that mattered, something Rebecca would have approved of. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. "Patricia, remember that research I asked for? We're moving forward. I need the best pediatric cardiac surgeon in the country, and I need them available within 2 weeks. Money is no object. Also, I want to set up the Rebecca Chen Foundation officially. Get our lawyers on it today." While Patricia took notes and asked questions, David watched Jenny hug her daughter, watched Sophia's joy at whatever good news her mother had shared. The little girl looked over at him again and gave him a thumbs up with her small hand. David smiled and returned the gesture. Outside, the Montana sun climbed higher in the sky, burning off the morning clouds. Everything was about to change for Sophia, for Jenny, and maybe most surprisingly for David himself. For the first time since Rebecca died, he felt like he had a reason to wake up in the morning. Not to escape his grief, but to do something meaningful with it. To turn his pain into something that could help others. The sun was shining above the clouds, And finally, after 6 long months of darkness, David was ready to step back into the light. 3 weeks after that morning in the diner, Jenny stood in the hallway of Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland, trying not to throw up from anxiety. Sophia was in pre-op, being prepped for surgery by a team of nurses who spoke in soft, cheerful voices that were probably meant to be reassuring, but only made Jenny's stomach twist harder. David stood beside her, holding 2 cups of terrible hospital coffee that neither of them would drink. He'd flown them out on a private jet 2 days ago, arranged for a hotel suite near the hospital, and somehow made sure that every single detail was taken care of. Jenny still wasn't used to any of it. "She's going to be fine," David said for the 10th time that morning. "Dr. Williams is the best in the country. He's done this surgery hundreds of times." "I know." Jenny wrapped her arms around herself, but knowing something and believing it are 2 different things. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind. David hadn't been exaggerating when he said he had people who could handle logistics. Within 48 hours of their conversation, Sophia had an appointment with Dr. Robert Williams, a surgeon whose waiting list was normally 6 months long. Blood work, imaging tests, consultations, everything happened at a pace that felt both miraculous and terrifying. The diner had given Jenny a leave of absence, paid, though she suspected David had something to do with that too. Her bills were mysteriously current. Her car, which had been making concerning noises for months, had been repaired. When she'd confronted David about it, he'd simply said, "You can't focus on Sophia if you're worried about everything else. Let me handle the details." It was too much and not enough at the same time. Too much generosity. Too much kindness from someone who barely knew her. Not enough time to process what was happening, not enough ways to say thank you. "Mrs. Martinez?" A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Sophia is asking for you." Jenny practically ran down the hall. Sophia lay in a hospital bed that looked enormous around her small frame, wearing a hospital gown printed with cartoon stars. Someone had let her keep her stuffed dragon, which she clutched tightly. "Hey, baby." Jenny sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed Sophia's hair back from her forehead. "How are you feeling?" "The doctor is going to fix my heart today," Sophia said, her voice matter-of-fact. "Then I can run fast like the other kids at school." "That's right, sweetheart. Will it hurt?" Jenny's throat tightened. "You'll be asleep the whole time. You won't feel anything. And when you wake up, Mama will be right there waiting for you." Sophia considered this, then nodded. "Mr. David said he'd be there too. Is that okay?" Jenny glanced back at the doorway where David waited. Over the past weeks, he'd become part of their lives in ways she hadn't expected. He'd visited them in Montana twice, always bringing small gifts for Sophia. Nothing extravagant, just things that showed he was paying attention. A book about dragons because she'd mentioned she liked them. A puzzle of the solar system because she wanted to be an astronaut. He never acted like their relationship was transactional. Never made Jenny feel like she owed him anything beyond what they'd agreed to. Sophia had taken to him immediately, with the easy trust of a child who didn't understand that most people didn't have private,